Hey, I'm Dan, and if you're new to homebrewing, so am I. Welcome to my adventures in homebrewing. Hey, everybody, it's Dan, and thanks for coming out for another beer or two along the way, one more time around the sun. I like to say thanks to me, because it was me on on the show last week. So as you saw that I did a Berliner Weisse. One of them actually turned out really good, and I am enjoying one right now, which is actually quite nice. Excuse me while I have a drink. And then I did one that I actually screwed up on. Yeah, live and learn, live and learn. So now I've got things all pre-planned. I'm going to do it again. I've got about 4 bags worth of frozen raspberries I got to thaw out and puree and get ready to put into the carboy with the wheat beer that's being soured by Lelleman's Wild Philly Sour Brew Pitch, whatever. It is the one yeast I found where you have everything in it. You just dump it and go. Now the other one I'm doing, excuse me, is I'm doing an experiment with yeast from my friends from Escarpment Laboratories. I'm using the Berliner Brett 2. So it's supposed to do the same thing, but I got a feeling you might get a little bit of that Brett flavor in there because of it. So you have to stay in tune, and maybe I'll have to do a little bit of a taste test for some friends in the backyard, and we'll do that. And maybe we'll make a live show out of it, because as you guys know, I am switching from Anchor and I'm going over to Podbean. And with Podbean, I can do live call-in shows and also have guests on at the same time and talk to everybody. So let me know what you guys thinks. Yeah, I haven't had one too many. I just fall on my head one too many times, guys. It's all good. So this week we're very lucky because I joined a new online homebrew club called the Brewtubers, because they were kind enough to invite me to join, which is really cool. They're a great bunch of guys, and I have never seen such an eclectic wealth of knowledge anywhere in the homebrew world. These guys are fantastic, and we're fortunate to have Woodshed Brewing with us, Dennis Pynn. Dennis, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me tonight. I appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks, man. So how about you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into it?
Yeah. So again, my name's Dennis Pynn. I'm actually a phys ed teacher and coach. Live in Rochester, New York. About 5 or 6 years ago, a friend of mine actually turned me on to home brewing, and I'd never even heard of it. I was a big fan of the macro lager type of thing. And I had just gotten out of coaching football, which took up the majority of my time outside of teaching and being a dad, and was looking for something to get involved with. And he turned me on to it, and I was like, well, this is kind of interesting. So, what does everybody do? You go to YouTube and you start researching and trying to figure out what's out there. So I started watching a bunch of guys. Unbeknownst to me, the club that I'm part of now, Brewtubers, that was a majority of the guys I was actually watching. And they're basically taking you through their brew days and taste testings and shipping beers all over the United States and having different people try it. So I started kind of, your typical, got my first extract kit and turned out okay. And it wasn't a terrible disaster. So I was like, all right, well, this is pretty cool. So I started, kind of working from that a little bit at a time, and then worked right into all grain, this typical, if you're going to get into a hobby, you got to jump both feet in and figure it out and screw it up. So about 5 years ago, I actually got into this, and probably about a year and a half ago, really got into Brewtubers. And at that point, it was not a full online club. It was just kind of a gathering of folks that were basically throwing YouTube videos out, which I was not part of putting YouTube videos out at that point. And just kind of got into the club and got to meet a bunch of the guys. And as you said, they're unbelievable folks that are really welcoming to anybody that's interested. Anybody that has a question about brewing, you throw it out there and you get all kinds of different information. So
Absolutely.
Great group of guys.
I mean, just on the other day, I put out a question because I have a glycol chiller and I have a bunch of lines. Some of the lines that came with my Spike Flex Plus were already insulated. Okay. So I have all these silicone tubes. I'm like going to these other ones. I'm like, I don't want them not being insulated because they'll condensate, they'll be funky or whatever else. And within 2 seconds, I forget who it was, but one of the guys just said, go to Home Depot. This is what you get. You're all good. I'm like,
yeah.
Damn.
it's amazing because if you're not an expert in it, somebody else has either screwed it up and figured out how do I fix it,
Yep.
or they're an expert in it. There's videos out there. The president, Gary, main brew guy, has actually done his own glycol build. He did the whole thing, built it all. Yeah, I tore apart an AC unit. He's got a YouTube video out there. So I'm jealous that I saw your post about the glycol chiller. I'm like, I'm clueless about it, but I'm super jealous that you have that. So
yeah, I did a lot of research on it because a lot of the ones that I can get my hands on here in Canada, you'll have to buy submersible pumps to put in with it. And I didn't want that. I wanted something where I can program and then walk away. And I was able to find one made by Brewbuilt where you can connect 4 tanks to it, 7-gallon tanks. Wow. And all individual, everything's all internalized. So there's no need for extra pumps or anything else like that. It's all there. So then you do your glycol mix with, I did like 6 liters of glycol to the rest of it all water. So I'm going to be fine because it won't freeze. Unlike what we did at the brewery where we kind of froze the beer in the break tank once.
Oops.
A little concentrated, went from being like a 5.2 to a 6.4 California common.
Hey, more alcohol, no problem there.
Exactly. Yeah. But that's not what we're here for tonight. Tonight we're going to be talking about fruit beer. So fruit beers, is what I understand, have been around, I guess, ever since really beer first came into play. They needed things to ferment, like make wine and things like that. And then somebody had the bright idea, why don't we introduce it into beer? I don't know exactly when, because even Mr. Google doesn't know that one. So I went from there. But my experience with making fruit beer is kind of hit and miss. What I've done before, I've made a blueberry cream ale where I let everything ferment out. Then I put in the blueberries and then I capped it again and let it go. And I did the same thing with the Berliner Weisse, except for the one that I totally botched. So I'm not exactly sure. Is it better to put it in with the actual primary, or is it better to rack off the fermented beer onto, say, a fruit puree or the fruit itself, and then let it go for a little while longer? What do you think?
It's a very interesting question, because I think different fruits do different things. I've talked to different people out there, and I'm not sure if you've heard about the biotransformation of hops. Yep. But there are some fruits, as I said, Gary, the president of the club, he's talked about some different fruits like mango will actually biotransfer. I didn't realize that. Really? And then, yeah, so you want to actually pitch those. And again, this is from his experience, you're pitching those during fermentation. I typically do the same thing that you've done, is actually allowed the fermentation to complete. Then I add the fruit for 48 hours or so, color, taste, flavor, those types of things. One of the things I do with my sour beers, adding fruit to it, I've actually added lactose. I found that the lactose actually kind of bumps up that flavor. The fruit kind of backs up the sweetness, because you typically ferment that out. You get a secondary fermentation happening. So you get a little bit of that flavor, but that helps that sweetness a little bit, and it balances the sour. But that's typically what you're talking about. Is typically what I do, is I add the fruit afterwards. I'll buy like the paint strainers bag that you get at a hardware store. Yep. Put that over the top of the fermenter, dump the puree into it, so I get as much out of it as I can, and I pull that out and I rack that into a keg. So I think it depends on what type of fruit you're talking about, and then how well it carries through. If you're talking about a watermelon, does the fruit carry through on that compared to a black raspberry or something a little bit more pungent?
Okay, so I don't necessarily strain it all, because what I'll do is I'll like have it. I work at a brewery part-time right now, being a retired guy. I got to do something to keep me busy. Sure. So I work part-time in the brewery, and what we do when we make our blueberry saison is my boss will actually go to Costco. He'll buy umpteen flats of the Kirkland frozen blueberries, and at the end of the night, when we're getting ready to do it all, he lays them all out in the bags, so they'll fall all over the floor. Let them all fall out. Come on the next morning, cuts them all open, and he has one of those big industrial immersion blenders.
Yeah. Yep.
It puts it all in a sanitized bucket, purees it all, and then dumps it in.
Okay.
And the reason why he does that is because he says anything that could be on them, like on the berries itself, once it's flash frozen, kills it instantly. I'm like,
Right.
okay, that makes sense to me. But he doesn't strain his either. He just dumps it all straight in because he says there's a lot in the skins and the seeds that not only give, say, character or sweetness for the beer, but it also gives off some kind of oil that helps, like, say, the lactic acid or the lactobacillus eat a little to keep going.
Okay.
So I tried looking into that, and I don't know, but I trust him because he makes award-winning beer. So
Makes
I mean,
sense.
makes sense. So
Yeah.
when I do things like my blueberry or raspberry beers, I get frozen berries and then I'll thaw them out and puree them. But this time around, there's a company down in Florida called Aseptic Puree,
Okay. Yes. Yep.
and I got a bunch sent to me, but they screwed up.
Oh no.
Because I'm allergic to mangoes,
Oh.
and I got mango puree instead of the blackberry puree I was supposed to get.
Oh, bummer.
So it's all good. So I talked to them today. They're going to send me the one I need, and they're like, I think you can keep that one and do something with it, like make maybe a sorbet or something or whatever.
Right.
But we'll see. But I find that sometimes, even if you let the beer ferment out all the way, as soon as you introduce something new that has sugar in it, that yeast activates right away.
Yep.
And then you got to wait another week or maybe week and a half to make sure that it's all done again. There's a brewery here in Guelph, Ontario called Third Moon, and they did a guava IPA, which is like, sounds really good, but they didn't let it ferment all the way, and people were getting can bombs where it was just oozing out like yeast and everything else.
Yeah, that can cause a problem. Yeah, if you're not if you're packaging and you're not some way to pasteurize that yeast so it doesn't keep doing that, that's a problem.
Yeah. So what do you think? Is it better to use say, like, things like we were saying, that the purees or the frozen berries, or can you actually go out and just get fresh fruit and go from there? Or do you think you need to cook that down just to make sure if there's anything there, it gets killed?
So the last one I did this past summer, a friend of mine had during COVID, everybody's finding different things to do.
Yeah.
A friend of mine had a black raspberry patch in his backyard.
Ooh.
And he started picking, and he just noticed he'd never really done anything with them. And he started picking them and noticed he ended up with gallon bags, just solid full, and he froze them. So I figured, you know what, if it's frozen, kind of like the flash freezing, that's what you're talking about. Is what I've done in the past is I bought the frozen fruit from a Costco, from one of those places, pureed it after it's come back from thawing. I decided to say, all right, we'll let the thaw. And it was a natural fruit right from his backyard. And I didn't have any problems with any, you wonder going, is there going to be a wild yeast or something in there? And it turned out to be one of the best sours I've made. I've given it to a bunch of different people, and they've had, great things to say about it. So I think you want to take as much care as you can to make sure that you're not getting any bacteria in it. But again, we're in a 5-gallon batch or even less. It'd be different if you're going to be at the brewery or like you're working. Mm-hmm. I don't know how the barrel system is, but that's whatever it is. That's more than 30 gallons. That's a lot of money.
Yeah,
to waste.
We have 215. Oh, is it 2.7, 215, and 230 barrel fermenters?
Yeah, that's a big risk to take if you're not sure that it's good. I mean, on a homebrew batch, you can say, all right, well, we're going to give it a shot and see what happens. But what I've read and what I kind of do is I go with the frozen stuff as much as possible. This, the black raspberries being from my buddy's house, I was like, all right, let's give it a shot and see what happens. Worst case scenario, it's terrible, and I throw out 5 gallons. I'm not out that much. So, but I do freeze it. I have never cooked anything down in terms of going on the hot side. It's always been on a cold side with a frozen type of berry.
Okay. Because I would think if you get the fresh stuff, you make the puree, and then you freeze it, should there be anything wild or even possible microscopic critter, it should kill it. At least I would think.
That would be my understanding as well. I'm not as, on the pasteurization side moving up, and I don't know the Celsius to Fahrenheit, but in the Fahrenheit, it's typically in the 180 range.
Yep.
So I'm not sure the Celsius on that side, but that's typically what people talk about pasteurization range being 20-ish degrees below boiling. But I don't know on the cold side, but everything I've read is freezing will do the same thing in terms of killing that. I'm just not positive of it.
Now, would you ever put, I mean, I know like for some of the beers that we've done at the shop, we've actually put, say, like dehydrated orange and grapefruit peel inside bags and dropped it in the boil kettle, just so you can extract the oils and essential oils and all that to give it the flavor.
Sure, your wet beers and things like that, your corianders and Yep.
And the question is, though, that's one way to do it, but do you think you could actually put say the puree or something inside of the bright tank and let it do it that way and let it condition on that?
I would think, there's a lot of people out there that do like a Mexican lager, and they'll take the peel or the just the green portion of a lime, and they'll, you zest that lime or zest a lemon, and they'll put that in there. I've seen people do that in the boil. I've seen people do that in the fermenter as well to try to get some of that citrus character out of it. I've never heard of putting it in the bright tank, but that'd be interesting to see. Does that flavor carry through through fermentation into the bright tank, or do you need to do it in the bright tank to get that flavor out? Because sometimes it's pretty delicate.
Yeah. Oh, well, seeing as I just got a bright tank, I might have to give that a try.
It'd be interesting to give it a shot and see what it would actually do for you.
Oh, Brewtuber episode coming.
There you go. Lots of experiments. That's the cool thing about this hobby, is there's so many different ways you can go with it. And as long as like we said, as long as you're not on the professional scale, you can really experiment and say, all right, well, does this transition to a professional size, or is it not worth the cost and the risk ratio? Is it not worth taking the shot?
And that's one thing I'm learning. I mean, there's been like a few beers I'm like, yeah, no, and just dumped and not even thought twice about it, because I'm like, I'm not going to drink a beer I don't like, and I'm not going to serve a beer to somebody that I don't like.
Yes.
And if it doesn't meet my standards, it's gone.
Yep.
Now, are there any fruits you think that really shouldn't work in a beer? I mean, one of the things that pops into my mind, well, obviously it's durian fruit. That doesn't go anywhere near beer, but the idea of rotting flesh in beer just doesn't do it for me.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, no. But would somebody say like lychee or like dragon fruit or anything like that? Do you think that might work?
Yeah, you know what? As you start looking around, and I apologize to go back to sours, but that seems like or the Berliner Weisse and the sours, that's where most people are putting it. You start looking around, there are so many different combinations of different fruits out there that I would have never considered even taking a shot at. Just in the recent, just this past month or two, I had one that had coconut, banana, I think it was guava. It was kind of that tropical fruit type thing, but I would have never thought of the banana being in there. That's not really something I typically go to. And, you think of banana and Hefeweizen from the yeast, but not from the actual banana. So I guess my mindset on it is, if you like to eat the fruit and it's enjoyable to you, why not give it a shot at least in a homebrew size scale?
Yeah, I guess it gives them more reason to try some grapefruit and things that combine together, drop that into a beer. But is there anything fruit wise do you think really just should not go inside of a beer?
That's a tough thing to say, because I think it's so open to what people's styles are. I think it's when you start talking about serving a beer to a person, you get into, is it a personal preference that you like it? I have this conversation with friends of mine all the time in terms of they don't like a brewery. I'm like, well, what about the brewery don't you like? And they'll get into their personal preferences about some of the flavors. And it's like, well, that's your personal preference. That's not everyone's. Is there a fault in the brewing? Is there off flavors? You get medicinal. What are those types of things? So I guess when you start thinking about what types of fruit shouldn't be used, I think you can get into that of, is that a personal preference to the fruit? or is there an actual purpose of not using that fruit? Does it cause some off flavor down the line that you may not, when you eat it as a fresh fruit, does it cause an issue when you got into fermentation? Because that could be an issue. I don't know of any fruits right off the top of my head that would cause that type of thing. I'd like to play with cherries. I would like, there's some things I've never done before. Some of those fruits that you don't even really think about, I wouldn't mind trying and seeing, and just to experiment and see, does it cause an issue down the line that you don't even anticipate with fermentation? Because that's a whole nother chemistry piece that you're not sure of how it's going to react.
I thought I left high school chemistry like 20 to 30 years ago. And I never thought I'd be back into it.
It's amazing because working in a school, we have chemistry teachers, and I went in and I said, all right, I need help with water chemistry. They're like, what are you talking about? And I explained what I'm doing. And I'm like, I should have paid more attention in chemistry class because I didn't. And I wish I had.
I actually got I have the yeast, the hops, and the malt books out of the 4 that the Brewers Association, I guess, sponsored and put out. The one I didn't get was the water chemistry book. Yeah. Because I looked at it and I'm like, oh dear God, no.
There's a lot of chemistry there. Yeah.
My mind was just melting looking at it. But that's neither here nor there.
Right.
Are there I know that like a lot of people use, or I should say, a lot of breweries, when they come time to make their beers and things like that with fruit, they use they use citrus like orange, lemon, lime, or grapefruit, or pomelo, pomegranate.
Yep.
But then they also lean heavily on the berries like cherries, blackberries, blueberries, raspberries, strawberry. There's one here that does a strawberry rhubarb saison, was actually really nice. But I'd be kind of curious to know, or what you think. There are some people who use things like apple or pineapple or things like that. To me, there's acids and sugars in there that might not necessarily go well with like a malt flavor or something else like that, or may have an adverse effect on the conversion of sugars and starches when it goes into the boil, or when you move it into the fermenter or whatever else. It may have an adverse effect even on the yeast. So that's where I get a little concerned when I'm doing with fruit puree, just fruit in general. I just usually stay within my wheelhouse and don't really necessarily delve too far out of what I know, or at least what I know works.
Right. And that's the thing, is if you test something and you're like, it's reacted well, and I like the product I get, you have a tendency to go back to it. So right now, in terms of what I typically do, I have a strawberry rhubarb. I call it berry and barbs. I'm kind of working on that process. I don't get enough of the strawberries out, so I keep playing with it, but it's fresh rhubarb out of my yard.
Nice.
I like it. I liked what I got out of it, but it wasn't exactly what I wanted. So I'm continuing to play with that. Strawberries, I don't get enough of the strawberries. So that's one of the things that that's a berry that I don't think the flavor carries through. I think that ferments out pretty quickly. And from what I've understand from people, it's a very delicate flavor. So I'm going to actually try the OYL. It's called Sun. It's a strawberry. It's a Belgian yeast that they've pulled the banana and clove out of, and you only get strawberry out of it. It's is it Omega? I have the pack out. I'm actually going to try it in that to see if I can kind of bump that up. But I typically go to the berries as well, because I think they react well. I think they give you a really cool color in the beer. That's what you were just drinking is a really cool color that I like out of that.
Thanks.
That's perfect. I just did a beer with another brew tuber from Rec Brewing, Matt. He'd never done a sour before. So we did a collab together, and we called it Tipsy Smurf, and it's got 3 pounds of blueberries on it. So, and it was, it was a cool color, and it reacted really well. I've done the mixed berries. So it's blueberries, raspberries, strawberries, done those together. I have one that's called Searching for Shade. It's mango, papaya, pineapple, and guava. It's more of that tropical summer. I want to add coconut to that and try to create that really, you're in the Caribbean type of thing. But I think experimenting with it and experimenting with one at a time, one fruit. What do you get out of it? And how, if you use it in the same way each time, then I know the way it's going to react. If I'm going to put it into fermentation, do I get biotransformation? Who knows? If I do it after fermentation, I get X color and I get X flavor out of it. And then, there's a linear type of reaction, and I know what I'm going to get at the end. So then as a brewer, I can start to create that recipe of, do I want to have a more malt forward beer? Will that work together? Or is it need to be a sour where you have that plain base and the fruit really is playing the main role and the malts sit back?
Okay. Have you ever tried a company called Brewer's Best where they do the natural extracts?
I don't believe I have. No, I have had some extracts, but I don't think it's from Brewer's Best before.
So I think it's Brewer's Best that I can get here at my local homebrew store, and they're all natural extracts. So when I made a strawberry, blackberry, raspberry cider.
Ooh, that sounds good.
And when I racked off of it onto the fruit and let it go for a while, I took a taste of it. I didn't like quite what it was. So per 5-gallon batch, you get like maybe a little bottle about that big, by about that big on the round.
Sure.
And it's one of those per 5-gallon buckets.
Okay.
So I figured that's an easy way just to bump up flavors.
Yes.
And there's no introduction of sugars.
Right.
So
you can kind of back up that flavor if it doesn't come through.
Yeah. So I was thinking when I do the Berliner again, if I don't think it's got enough raspberry in it, other than going to town and just pounding raspberry to it, I'll just drop a bottle of that into it and see what happens.
Yep. No, I think that's a great backup to that. And then you can kind of see how much of that do you like. Do you start with half of it and say, all right, well, that's enough? Or do you go to the full thing? Because it's hard to back off of it. If it's too much, then it's because that's the only thing I find with, and it depends on the brand that you go with. Sometimes I get like a chemical aftertaste on them. So if they're the natural ones, I think you're the best bet going with that. Some of the companies you have to decide what you like.
I had a lot of people say, "Oh yeah, just go to the grocery store and buy the ones you can get for like Clubhouse and things like that. You're fine. Go for that." I'm like, no.
No, it's
no.
Yeah, if it tastes chemically, then that ruins your entire batch.
Exactly.
That's not really a good idea.
I mean, when I first jumped into doing beer again, because I've told the story I don't know how many times, and people who are listening to this are going to say enough with telling this fucking story, but. When I got into doing homebrew, my wife had bought me like a starter kit where you got your carboy, your bucket, the paddle, and everything else, and a can of LME.
Oh yeah, yep.
You know what I'm saying, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
So I did that, but the bucket didn't come with a lid.
Oh.
Or an airlock. So I'm thinking, okay, well, Army guy, we'll make it work. Saran wrap. All over the top. It's going to be airtight. Saran wrap.
Absolutely.
Then I put bungee cords, and then we call it paracord. It's like a nylon cord with it's almost like a cotton with a nylon core.
Sure.
That we can use for parachutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I wrap that around, also tied on tight. I'm like, okay, this is going to be fine.
Right.
It's not what could go wrong. Well, my son at the time was just learning to walk.
Oh no!
And walking. What's this?
Oh, just poke.
And I had a very young dog at the time too. He comes ripping around. What's this? And goes his snout. And I'm like, I'm patching this thing up as much as I can as I go. Then at one point I look down. Why is it growing mushrooms?
Like you have an entire infected batch.
Very infected. I'm like,
man,
what's that smell? It's like, it's me dumping beer down the drain.
Yeah, that's gone.
It's gone.
Oh, that's rough.
So yeah. So now what I'm doing is that when I got back into it, I went and bought an all-in-one system and everything else. And the very first beer I made on it was a s'mores stout.
Ooh, that sounds good.
Oh yeah. It was boozy, like 10% boozy.
Oh, okay. Sit by the fire and only have a couple of those when it's bedtime.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people are telling me like, well, if you can do things like that, you should do tinctures. And they're like, well,
Sure.
you should do a tincture with your fruit. And I'm like, that does not make sense to me because you're introducing not only the fruit, but you're actually introducing like an alcohol to it that
Sure.
you don't need to. And it's going to totally adjust the flavors.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
You're going to get typically people will use some type of neutral spirit for those tinctures, a
yeah.
gin or a vodka or something like that. But you're obviously raising the alcohol in it, and you're going to change the flavors of those. I mean, it's one thing if you're doing a bourbon barrel aged something, and you're adding the wood chips into that, and you're following that follows. But if you're doing it with fruit and it's already flash frozen, that's the whole point of the tincture, is to try to kill anything that's there. So if it's flash frozen, you should be safe doing that. So why introduce a different flavor then?
Exactly. I mean, I did a tincture for a barrel aged stout I just did. Thank you to the guys at Escarpment Laboratories once more for giving me the yeast to do that. And I hope you're enjoying the beer that I gave you guys. These guys are fantastic. They've said to me that anytime I want to do an experiment, they'll give me the yeast to do it.
Oh, that's awesome.
So they're fantastic. And I plug these guys religiously because don't get me wrong. Dry yeast is fantastic depending on what you want to do with it.
Yeah.
I just find I get better results by using liquid yeast because one, I just got to let it warm up, shake it up. I don't do starters. I just dump it straight in, and I've had fantastic success.
That's good. Yeah.
So
as long as it's not too old and your viability is there, you should be all set with it.
Exactly. And the guys seem to send me the stuff that is perfectly good, in good shape, and relatively brand new. Some of the stuff they sent me has been like they just harvested it, packaged it, and sent it out. So which is like can't get any fresher than that.
And they're in your area too, aren't they?
Yeah, they're about 5 to 6 hours from where I live.
Okay. Are they Canadian?
Yes, they are.
That's what I thought. Okay.
So if you ever heard
in Canada are they?
Guelph, Ontario.
Guelph, Ontario. Okay. Guelph. Okay.
Guelph.
And you're in Ottawa, am I correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So Rochester, it's basically Toronto is just basically north of us.
I know where Rochester is.
Okay. Just across the pond, right?
Just across the pond, my way. You're making me sound like where I grew up in the Maritimes. Yes, bye. To all my friends who are down home, hi, how are you? Yes, I'm making fun of the accent. Trust me. It's taken a long time for it to get pounded out of me. But I find like on a really hot, nice summer day, a good fruit beer goes a long way because they're usually pretty low ABV.
You really are. You're typically going to be somewhere in that 3.5 to 5%.
Yeah.
So a sour, a wheat beer that's got fruit added to it, which are things that I enjoy. Although those are perfect summertime beers. That's right up. You got the shandies that add the lemonades to it. So it's all kind of in that same 4.5%. You want fruit during the summertime. You want low ABV. You want something that's a dry on the finish. That's a quenchable type of beer.
Nice. All right. Is there anything you want to like stress that anything you found along your travels for doing fruit beers that you think, even if it's mistakes you made along the way, that people should be aware of?
I guess, as you get into the blogs and start reading, and it's more on, I guess, more towards your Berliner Weisse and your sours, people get a little out of control with oxygen. And if you read the Milk the Funk wiki and you get into those types of things, there's a lot of stuff out there where people are like, you know what, you don't have to. Like when I first started, I purged my fermenter when I had I used Good Belly, Good Shot. It's a probiotic to pre-acidify my wort, and then I kind of go through the brewing process. But I think people freak out over every little thing, and I think if you sanitize, keep everything clean as best your ability, and just use basic, good common sense in terms of your brewing practices, you're gonna be fine. I think people go over the top sometimes. So I think if you just stay within your realm and don't go too far outside of it and take one step at a time and kind of figure out what works for you and then kind of work off of that. Don't don't go off the deep end
Right.
and adding all these things at one time. So one thing I've learned is you can't then reproduce what one of those 18 things that you added the thing that you liked.
Mm-hmm.
So if you add one thing at a time, you can say, all right, well, this was a yeast, or this was a fruit, or this was a fermentation temperature. Then you can go back to it and say, all right, well, I reproduce that. I like this, but I want to amp up that. And then I can change it and do those, and maybe use small batches, do 1 or 2 gallon batches, and say, all right, well, then I can play around with it and I can brew more often. So that's been my kind of a background with it. And it's, I want to make this massive beer, and I can't do that. And I got to back up and try to figure it out. So I think if you're taking baby steps as you're going through it, that's probably the best I have.
Usually come by about October, November. I'm making beer for the winter, so I don't have to be outside.
Right.
So
yeah. At this point in whether you're in the States or in Canada, in this point of the country, I was brewing that Tipsy Smurf I was telling you about. It was 3 feet of snow outside in February that I was doing it, and he's in South Carolina with his garage door open. And I'm like, you suck.
Yep. But then again, 3 feet. I would take 3 feet of snow over like 6 feet I get here.
Oh gosh, no, yeah. At the very least, I guess my chilling time is much quicker because I use the snow and I have a pump and I run the water through the snow. So I guess that's okay. But
there's been a few times where I've put the beer into kegs and I've cold crashed just in a snowbank, pack it around the keg, and just let it be for like the day. And it's done.
It works, right?
Well, sub-zero temperatures. Yeah, I hope so. So anything else you want to pass along for tips or tricks?
I think if you get on YouTube's, that's the best thing I've found is get out there and ask questions. I think people are really interested in interacting with people on YouTube's with your comments. Mm-hmm. And people, for the most part, are really generally, what I find with brewing, more so than I ever would have thought, is people are really open to sharing. These are mistakes I've made. These are things that I would do. You would think in a creative type of thing like this, as someone gets something that's good, they kind of want to, this is mine. People are really, really welcoming and open and want you to be successful.
Absolutely. This is like one of the best communities for a hobby I've ever been in. I mean, I've had my own photography business, and it was so cutthroat. Like, you reach out for help from somebody to help you out. No. Or what's in it for me? Or like, I'll help you, but this is what's going to cost you. I'm like, well, what the hell? In the craft beer world, and at least in the homebrew world here in where I live, the breweries all help each other. All the guys in the craft and the homebrew world, we all help each other. I mean, there's the odd person who, like, you're like, I want nothing to do with you, but that's here nor there. But this is one of the coolest things I've ever done. And guys, if ever you have questions or whatnot, go to the BrewTubers. Check out their videos, pelt the guys with questions. You can ask me questions too. I don't know if it'll be any good, but we'll see what happens.
Hey, throw it in there. We have a Discord channel that you can jump in and ask questions. You don't have to be a paid member. You can just join that, and there's a lobby that you can throw questions out. So it's like any of those blogs you get onto, but the nice thing is it's live. People have their phones on all the time, and they're constantly answering. And it may not be the best advice in the world, but at least you got some answers and you'll get it real time.
Dennis, thanks a lot, man. I appreciate your time tonight, bud.
Well, not a problem. I appreciate having me on. Thanks a bunch.
Awesome. So guys, thanks a lot for coming along for the ride and a beer or two along the way. Thanks again to Dennis and the BrewTubers for being a part of the show tonight. Check them out. Check out Woodshed Brewing Company. I believe you're on Instagram too, right?
Not Instagram, but I'm on Twitter and YouTube.
Check them out on Twitter and YouTube. Check them out also on, if you go into Discord, make sure you hit Dennis up with some questions. And also this week, I'll be talking with Zach from the Toronto Brewing, which is the local homebrew store down in Toronto that I've been dealing with a lot lately. So his episode will probably be out in a little while. Guys, thanks a lot. And I'll see you on the other side.